Hello, testing. Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for being here. I was expecting a much larger crowd. In fact, when I went to bed last night, I was dreaming that there is a full audience, and I would say things like, "Wow, what a big turnout today." But sadly, that's not the case. Maybe it's because Azure is here promoting their stuff. But anyways, so I'd like to present my final year project that I did. It's about performing autonomous exploration using multiple robots in a two-dimensional space without the use of a GPS. So first of all, a little bit about myself. I just graduated from the University of Hong Kong with a degree in mechanical engineering and a minor in computer science. I currently work at Deploifai, and we basically build developer tools for data science people to do machine learning on cloud services. So let me give you an outline of the presentation I'm going to give you. So I will first introduce some background information about the project, and I will split my main content into 4 tasks. Tasks 1 and 2 refer to exploration being done by a single robot and a multi-robot. In task 3, I will talk about the implementation of the algorithms that we developed using open source tools. And in task 4, I will present some experimental results that we obtained. And finally, I'll provide a conclusion. So now let's talk about exploration. It is interesting because humans have done it for a very long time. In essence, what that means is that a person basically goes into an unknown environment and looks around and basically takes in that new unknown information and basically draw a map about their surroundings. So here's an example of an explorer who's exploring a cave. And this person must be well trained and well equipped to be able to do so. We believe in scenarios like these, in very dangerous situations, robots can come play a role. So my project is about using multiple robots to be able to do exploration autonomously. And the benefits for this project would be very clear. First of all, human safety risks would be minimized. We do not require as much expert manpower. And because we can use a fleet of robots, let's say if we use 100 robots to map a particular location, we can perform exploration much faster. And because we do not require the human element, or at least we are able to reduce it, costs can be minimized. So now let's talk about how exploration is performed. We can study how humans do it. We believe that exploration is essentially a looped process, and there are 4 steps for a single human explorer to map out an unknown location. The first step is to identify frontiers. Now, frontiers are basically regions that are unknown, because at the end of the day, what exploration does is to look at the unknown spaces and figure out what those unknown surroundings are. Once we have a list of frontiers that are interesting for exploration, the explorer needs to find the best frontier to go to first. So usually what that means is to go to a place that can give you a lot of new information, but at the same time, it's hopefully not too far from where the current position of the explorer is. Once we know where the explorer needs to go, the explorer needs to be able to navigate towards it. What that means is to plan a path and avoid known obstacles because we don't want to, hurt ourselves, right? And finally, as the explorer arrives at the frontier, they need to be able to figure out where they are as they move towards these unknown locations. That means localization. And as the explorer arrives at the frontier, they will be able to see those unknown surroundings and take in new information and add it to the map. So by completing these 4 steps, exploration can be done by a single explorer. We believe that robots can mimic that process, as shown by many of the robotic applications that we see out there today. In our case, let's look at this map here. So in the center, we have a robot. And the white space refer to areas that a robot is free to move in. The black rectangles actually refer to the surfaces of obstacles that the robot can see. And the gray area refers to unknown areas. So essentially what exploration means is to figure out what is there in those gray areas and expand the known information on the map. So since the first step is to identify frontiers, in very technical terms, they refer to the boundaries between free space and unknown space. And if we can get the robot to move towards these boundaries, the robot should be able to see more there is in the unknown spaces. So for us humans, if you look at this map, it's pretty easy. We can just draw these contour lines, right? In our project, we make use of a data structure called a random rapidly expanding tree, in short, an RRT. In detail, in concept, an RRT basically grows from the current position of the robot, but it only grows in free space. And what it does is that as soon as it encounters a boundary between a free space and an unknown space, which is the frontier, we basically make that detection and put it somewhere. In our project, we make use of two RRTs, a global RRT and a local RRT. The global RRT grows from the initial position of the robot until it fully covers the entire environment, whereas the local RRT grows from the current position of a robot, but it resets every time it finds a new frontier. So essentially what that means is that a global RRT is very good at finding frontiers far away from the robot, whereas a local RRT is good at finding frontiers that are closer to the robot. And we basically combine the advantages between these two RRTs to be able to find a lot of frontiers. Now the RRTs generate a lot of frontiers, but a lot of them can actually be quite close to each other, and to make them usable, we can cluster them, okay? So during the clustering process, we would also filter out some of the frontiers that don't actually have a lot of unknown surrounding area around them. For example, certain frontiers that are in that corner, which can only see a little bit of this small rectangular unknown area. That's not a very useful frontier, so we just discard them. Now with a list of these frontier clusters, the next step is to figure out which is the best frontier to explore. We use an equation called a revenue equation to make a comparison between the frontiers. So revenue is made of two parameters, a positive parameter, which is information gain. Now this refers to the amount of unknown area surrounding a frontier, because at the end of the day, what we want to know is about the unknown areas. So this gives us the positive part of the equation. The second parameter is a negative parameter, refers to navigational costs. Now in simple terms, we can simply take the distance between the current position of the robot to a particular frontier. Now we take this equation and apply it to every single frontier that we have relative to the robot, and basically make a comparison and pick the frontier with the highest revenue and simply make that as our navigational goal for the robot to explore. So let's say we pick this frontier with the highest revenue. The step 3 is to get the robot to navigate towards it. Now what that means is the robot needs to be able to plan a path that would avoid the known obstacles on the map and arrive at the frontier. So as you can see, a path has been planned and the robot is able to follow it and move towards the frontier. Step 4 is about slam. Now what this means is that as the robot arrives at the frontier, as it moves, it needs to figure out where it is on the map. And at the same time, as the robot arrives at the frontier, it scans the unknown environment, finds new information, and it needs to add it to the map. So as you can see, the previously unknown regions have been partially mapped. So essentially, by the end of the 4th step, we should have a little bit more known information from the environment that we're actually exploring. So by completing these 4 steps in a loop, a single robot is capable of mapping an unknown environment autonomously without human interference. Now my project is actually about using multiple robots to do autonomous exploration. So the question now is to how do we get these multiple explorers to work together? There are two additional problems to solve. The first one is to get the explorers to share information with each other, and we need to figure out what kind of information needs to be shared. And the second problem is to get the explorers to coordinate with each other. In the context of exploration, information sharing is basically merging maps, which is essentially taking the individual maps that each explorer is going to generate and merge those maps together to form a global map. The global map is required to identify frontiers in a global context and be used to coordinate the robots. And coordination in this case is to find the best frontier for each explorer to explore. So once each explorer receives their best frontier, they navigate towards it, and as they arrive at their frontier, they perform SLAM, they localize themselves, they find new information, they add it to their map, and the loop repeats. Now let's talk about the first problem. How do we merge maps together? So I'll show you an example with three maps generated by three different robots, but they refer to the same environment. So you might be able to see some common features in these maps. There's an axis of origin in each map. There are also the initial positions, which are the starting locations of the robots. Now, the simplest map merging process is to figure out how these initial positions relate to each other in a global coordinate frame of reference. If we know what that relation is, we are actually able to easily overlap the maps together and sort of come out with this sort of an image. So then the next step is pretty simple. We just have to take the quantities that represent each individual map and merge those quantities together to become a global piece of information. I will show you the equations, the mathematical equations that we use to perform the actual map merging procedure. But before that, let me give you a quick overlook of what a map really is. So in robotics, in two-dimensional robotics, the easiest way to represent a map is to use something called an occupancy grid. And this grid basically has many small grid cells. So these grid cells could be around 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters, or it could be even smaller, depending on how you set it. Each grid has a probability value, and this is the probability of whether there's an obstacle in that grid cell. So if a grid cell is a free space, it has a very low value. If there's an obstacle, then it has a high value. And if the grid cell is unknown, we can simply assign a value of -1. So these are the three mathematical equations that we apply to every grid cell in the environment and basically take the probability values of each grid cell that basically overlap with each other and merge those values together. So I won't go into detail as to how each of these equations work, but this is just shown for your context, for your understanding. So we apply those equations to every grid cell in the environment, and we should be able to obtain a merged global map. From the merged global map, we use it to identify frontiers and to make decisions about how to coordinate the multiple robots to work together. So that's about coordination. Now this is, again, another example. Let's say we have 2 robots that need to work together on this map, and we have 6 frontiers that have been identified. The problem now to solve is to figure out which frontiers should be assigned to each robot. Once again, we're going to use the revenue equation that I presented earlier. However, this time, we need to apply the equation to each frontier relative to each robot. So since we have 6 frontiers and we have 2 robots, what that means is that we're going to get 6 times 2 equals to 12 revenue values. And we can put these values into a table and make a comparison. We then take a greedy approach to selecting the best frontier. We can just take the frontier robot pair with the highest revenue and simply assign that frontier to that robot. So in this case, we assign robot 1 to frontier 1. The next step is to figure out which frontier robot 2 should go to. Now, obviously, by common sense, we shouldn't send robot 2 to the same frontier as robot 1, isn't it? Because that would be quite redundant. We don't want multiple explorers to be going to the same locations for exploration. But in that case, how do we choose another frontier for robot 2 to explore? We're going to look at this particular frontier. Let's call it frontier 2. It is somewhat close to frontier 1, which has already been assigned to robot 1. In fact, they're so close that you can see that there's a little bit of an overlap in the unknown surrounding areas between these two frontiers. Now, the overlap is very useful because it informs us that some information gain from this particular frontier needs to be reduced. What that means is that the actual information gain for this frontier, should it be assigned to the second robot, would actually be lowered. We take this idea and modify the revenue equation so that we could simply take a reduced information gain as our positive parameter, but we still keep the negative parameter, which is navigational cost, the same. The distance from the current position of a robot to a particular frontier. So then we apply this modified revenue equation to every frontier relative to robot 2, which means our revenue table is updated. First of all, the column for robot 1 is completely removed because robot 1 has now been assigned to explore frontier 1. And for that same reason, the row for frontier 1 is removed. And for the column of robot 2, again, we take a greedy approach to selecting our frontiers. We just take the frontier that gives us the highest revenue and assign that to robot 2. And in this case, it's just frontier 3. Now, you might notice that the revenue value for frontier 2 relative to robot 2 in blue color has actually been reduced. This is, again, an indication of the amount of overlapping unknown area that I've presented earlier. So essentially, coordination allows us to assign different robots to different frontiers and achieves a sort of very simple but effective greedy approach to coordination. So these are the 5 steps that we used for coordinating multiple robots to autonomously explore. And they basically repeat this loop until the interested region is fully explored. Now let's talk about implementation. Our project makes use of very powerful open source tools, and we use something called ROS as our main platform. It stands for the Robotic Operating System, or the Robot Operating System. ROS is pretty much the de facto standard for modern robotics projects. ROS is very popular because it has a lot of open source libraries that are available for any sorts of robotic tasks. And for us, 2 of the most important ones would be for navigation as well as SLAM. So in ROS, there's something called a navigation stack. Now, this navigation stack basically takes map data, the current position of the robot, and a navigational goal, which is a frontier that we assign, as input, processes it, plans a path, avoids obstacles, and comes out with an output, which is the path that a robot should follow to be able to reach that navigational goal. And for SLAM, we use a library called gmapping, which is one of the many popular solutions for SLAM out there. It basically helps us localize the robot and add new information to the map. Now, our project implements our own custom algorithms, which is for frontier detection, frontier filtering, and frontier assignment. ROS supports 2 very popular programming languages, C++ and Python. So C++ is very useful for algorithms that need to run very quickly and also consume as little memory as possible. Whereas Python is very useful for algorithms that need to make use of the large ecosystem of libraries that Python supports, including NumPy and PyTorch. In this project, I made use of C++ to perform the frontier detection part. and Python to do frontier filtering, frontier assignment, as well as the map merging parts. Now, I'm going to show you an example of a custom algorithm that we implemented. But before that, when you talk about algorithms, we need to talk about the data types that are available for use. In ROS, once again, we can represent a map using a data type called occupancy grid. It already comes out of the box of ROS. For the current position of the robot, we can represent it as pose. And in ROS, it allows you to define your own custom data types. And in this case, I use the custom point to represent each frontier. And each frontier simply has an X and Y coordinate. This is an example of the frontier assignment algorithm that we implemented. It is only a portion of it. So in the beginning, we could import the libraries that we use. At the top of the file, we have ROS.py. So ROS.py is basically the ROS bindings that we can call into using, so that we can use ROS processes and methods. We can import ROS data types like the occupancy grid from the navigation messages library. We can import our own custom data types. We can even, because we're using Python, we can import NumPy, and we can import our own Python libraries as well. So I'm not going to go into detail of how this algorithm works, but essentially, in this section, what it does is that it figures out where the current position of the robot is. It uses a global map and a robot base frame as reference. With the robot position information and a list of frontiers that we detect using the frontier detection algorithm, we can compute a revenue list for this particular robot. And out of the revenue list, we can simply pick the frontier that gives us the highest revenue to be assigned to that robot. And we do it here. We can create a navigational goal for the robot to be able to navigate towards it. And this goal is basically sent to the open source navigation stack that we use. In reality, we do run multiple robots to test our algorithms. So in fact, each robot needs to be able to perform its own LiDAR scanning. And the LiDAR data that it's obtained is sent to the SLAM component, which is used to localize the robot and to draw the map. And the map data is sent to the navigational component to navigate the robot, to plan paths, avoid obstacles. The frontier detection components and the frontier filtering and the frontier assignment components were run on a master PC. And the information that is, the frontiers that are assigned are basically sent to the robots as sort of commands. The map merging part is also done on a master PC as well. In reality, all of these different processes and algorithms need to work together. And they essentially take in some information as input, processes it, and output some information, and for the next component in the network for processing. But essentially, all of these components come together and ultimately solve the problem of autonomous exploration using multiple robots for this project. Now let's talk about some of the experiments that we've done. We've done experiments both in simulation and in the physical lab environment. This is the physical robot that we used. It is equipped with a two-dimensional LiDAR, so it's able to scan the environment and figure out where the obstacles are. It is equipped with a Jetson Nano computer, so this basically serves as the brain of the robot. It also has mechanism wheels, which allows the robot to move in any direction on a two-dimensional plane. This is our simulation result. On the left, this is a simulated world done in Gazebo, which also integrates with ROS. You can see that there are models of robots on it, and there are the models of obstacles. On the right, it is a global map visualized through a tool called RViz, again, also integrated with ROS. So as you can see from map visualized in RViz, frontiers could be detected, and they're assigned to each robot, and they're able to collaborate with each other and move to and explore. The global map that is rendered is done in real time and can be visualized easily. We also did experiments in a physical lab. In this case, we simply used 2 robots. And on the left, it is the global map visualized through our viz. On the right is a video footage that we've taken. So again, frontiers are detected in yellow, and plans, navigational paths could be planned. They're assigned to robots, they could move around and obtain new information from the unknown environment and be merged into the global map. You might see that one of the robots is sort of doing a bit of a dance there. It's because navigation as a problem is not 100% reliable. There can be some problems if you don't tune the parameters well enough. Through our experiments, we have found out that in general, by increasing the number of robots, we do observe a reduction in exploration time, both in the simulation environment, which we use up to 3 robots, and in the physical environment, which we used only up to 2 robots. So allow me to conclude my presentation. Through this project, we have shown that a robot is capable of autonomous exploration. They are able to scan the environment, make decisions about where to explore, and draw maps. We have also shown that using multiple robots generally means less exploration time. These robots are capable of sharing information with each other and coordinate. And thirdly, a robotics project like this can be done fully in open source, using ROS as an open source tool. And that's it for my presentation. I thank you for being here. I'm now open for Q&A.
In terms of the actual physical laboratory test, would you happen to come across situations like at least one of the robot malfunctions and sort of provide wrong mapping information to the overall map?
Right. So in our controlled lab environment, we don't have a lot of external interference. So at least during our testing, we didn't see any malfunctioning of the robots themselves. However, there is a certain level of inaccuracy in the map data that we generate. There's a finite resolution that we can generate. So in our case, our occupancy grid has a 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter grid cell, which is quite large actually if you look at it like this. We can increase the resolution by reducing the size of the grid cell, but what that means is that we have more data to compute, but that's sort of restrained by the amount of hardware processing power that we have. In terms of malfunctioning that you're interested in talking about, we do observe that our robots can crash into each other. So our project actually implemented the algorithms in a way that we assume that there are only static obstacles. And since robots can actually move around in that environment, if a robot sees another robot moving, it's actually a dynamic obstacle, right? So it wouldn't register that obstacle properly. So we have observed that the robots can crash into each other. So there is a lot more further improvement to the scope of this project, but essentially what I'm trying to show here is that exploration can be done autonomously, but there is a lot more work to be done.
I have 2 questions. So can you elaborate more on how you design the hardware to use? So I see there's LiDAR on the robot. And do you have to do you just buy the whole robot yourself, or do you have to assemble each components, or how you test each component, which is better to use? The second question is this, can this work be extended to do a 3D mapping? Thank you.
Right. So because this is a final year project, and we did it with a professor as our supervisor, he was very kind to actually purchase these hardware, the robots are already assembled, some software has already been installed. As a matter of fact, ROS has been installed onto this robot as we bought it. So in terms of the hardware, I was not involved in any way in terms of tampering it, but all of this LiDARs and Jetson nanocomputers, they were working already. Now, for a second question about three-dimensional exploration, this project does not cover three-dimensional space. However, the same ideas can be applied. Because at the end of the day, exploration is about going into these unknown areas. So let's say if you could detect frontiers in a three-dimensional space, then you can assign them and make the robots navigate towards them. So the same ideas can be applied to, let's say, exploring using a bunch of drones, but the algorithms would have to be tweaked and improved.